Take 4. Is your life kinda complicated? Welcome to One Take, the podcast designed to seek wisdom to live simple, healthy, and happy. We'll get there one take at a time. I'm your host, Yezmin Thomas. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Take 4 of One Take, the podcast. I am your host, Yezmin Thomas, and I really thank you for being here with me. Today, we are going to talk about a touchy subject, one that not many people like to talk about. I didn't want to talk about it before until I realized that I really needed to talk about it to have more peace of mind. And going straight to the point, we're basically going to be talking today about our purpose in life, about God, about what's the point of being here, what are we supposed to be doing being here. And I know it's kind of a deep topic and deep questions, and I wanted to address this because here's where the background comes. I've been wondering that for a long time. Why? I mean, really, what's the point of being here on Earth? And I know it's a big question, and I hope you stay with me on this one. Perhaps you're wondering the same thing, and I would appreciate it if you stick around for this one, because I know it's a topic that not a lot of people like to talk about. But giving you the background. So I was born and raised Catholic. I went to Catholic schools my entire life. I learned the prayers. We went to church. We went to Mass. Every morning we started school with prayers. And I did this for my entire life growing up. You know, I went to Catholic schools from kindergarten to college. And my parents, of course, made me go to church every Sunday. And to be honest with you, through my 20-some years of Catholic upbringing, I didn't understand what was the point. What's the point to going to church? What's the point of praying? What's the point? I'm sorry, guys, I did not get it. I'm still trying to figure out. So when I had a choice, when my parents didn't force me to go to church, I was like, woohoo, I don't have to go to church anymore. And I didn't. And I got married, had my own kids, and guess what? We didn't go to church. We didn't talk about God for about 12 years. And of course, life has its up and downs. And during one of the downs in my life, I realized that something was missing. And the stuff that life had to offer wasn't making it for me. It wasn't enough. And one day we decided to go back to church. And we tried a couple places. And we found this one place. And the moment, it's a Methodist church in Texas. And the moment the service started, I felt kind of weird because I've never been to a church other than the Catholic. So I felt like a traitor. But at the same time, when the pastor spoke, I understood. I was able to relate to what he was saying to me. I was able to understand how there was purpose in having a relationship with God. Because to be honest with you, I've never had one. I thought I had one because I was doing what I was told to do when I was growing up. Go to church, pray, and this and that. But I never had a connection. And so we kept going to Life Point United Methodist Church in Haslett, Texas. And I understood, oh, okay, this is what believing in God is about. This is what having a relationship with God is about. And this is a personal journey, and I know everyone goes through their own journeys. I'm not afraid about talking about my situation because I know there's a lot of people that might be there, and this experience, sharing my experience with them, can help them. But more than sharing my experience with you guys, I want to share with you a conversation with the person that opened my eyes to having this new thinking about God and my purpose in life. And that person is Pastor Thomas. Officially, Dr. Thomas Childs. But I know him from going to church. We've had a few sit-downs to talk about life and all the questions that I have and God and what really is the point of me being here, why he created me, why are we on earth. And instead of just relating to you what those chats were about, I decided that I felt so much better after talking to him. My understanding about life and God and purpose changed drastically after I talked to him. And I thought, what a better way to share what happened to me than talking to him and sharing this with you guys. So yes, he's a pastor, and this podcast episode, we're going to talk a lot about God and our purpose in life and finding meaning. So I ask you to have an open mind. Pastor Thomas says during his sermons, bring your brain. So yeah, you'll need your brain. He makes you think. It's not just because the book says or because the prayer says or because the priest says. He makes you think. And that's when I finally found a connection. When I was asked to think and not just repeat. And that's why I want to share this conversation with you guys. It was for me, it really changed my perspective. It really made me want to have a relationship with God. And it made me realize how, by having that intention of investing in the relationship, I could improve my life. And not just on that level, but on a personal level too. If you invest on the relationships that you have with your kids, your family members, your husband, your friends, you will get a lot of joy out of that investment. And that's something that I've been working on. And I thought I would share this with you guys. Like I said before, I know it's a topic that many people don't want to talk about, but I'm not afraid about touchy subjects. And so it is really an honor for me to be able to share this conversation with Pastor Thomas. And if you're interested in hearing what he has to say, he has over 15 years worth of sermons as podcasts, episodes on his website. And all the information, you can find it on the blog at www.yezminthomas.com. You'll find links to his podcast, his website, to know a little bit more about who he is, what he stands for. And there's also mentions of several books that you'll find listed on the post for this specific podcast episode. And one of the questions that, we talk about, why even believing in God? So if you're someone that doesn't believe in God, don't turn it off. Don't go away. Listen, this might help you clear your mind. So this is my conversation with Pastor Thomas Childs. Pastor Thomas, thank you so much for being with us today. This is a new adventure, and I am honored to have you, and I'm honored that you accepted to participate. You are one of the, if not the wisest persons that I've personally met. Just from coming to Life Point and listening to your sermons, I've learned so much. My perspective in life has changed so much. And because I felt that change, I felt like this was something I wanted to share with more people. many people don't have access to you directly, but you do have all your sermons online. And I listen to them too, and it's been great. So this is why we're here, and I want to share with everyone. So start by telling us a little bit about yourself.
So the sermons online, it's like almost 15 years of sermons at lifepointumc.com. There's no charge for it, and people can go through and find the topics they're interested in. And
we're going to put it on the show notes too, on the post online, so they can have all those resources.
Oh, good. Okay. And then the 2 books I've written as well.
Your 2 books?
Yeah, and which we can get into some of that if you want later. But yeah, a little bit of background. My dad, I grew up in South Alabama, and my dad was an emergency doctor, and my mom pretty much stayed at home to take care of me. I have one brother, he's 3 years older than me. But the piece of this that I thought I'd bring into this introductory conversation is that my dad was never one to take things on faith, especially as a physician. Science was a very big deal in our household. And so Mom was a really devout Christian and Methodist, and Dad too in his way, but it was really, for him, we would go out and look at the stars. He had telescopes, and he would read all the science journals and all the... So growing up, it was always, where God was concerned, it wasn't just take it on faith. Explain yourself, or don't talk about it. So question things, in other words. And I found that over time that wound up being a real good philosophy that he gave to me, even though early on that can be really frustrating if you can't find answers. But anyway, with all that in mind, I was a musician by trade going into college. I had done really well as a trumpet player and a piano player in Alabama, which got me scholarships to Loyola in New Orleans. And I played with the New Orleans Symphony for a little bit. I toured with a Christian band called Truth, and through all of that, I just realized that I did not want to be a professional musician. That is a hard life. Now, if you love that,
tons of travel.
Great. Too. Oh, my goodness. You know, the band Truth that I toured with just for a couple months, I think they had 320-something concerts that year. And if you do the math, and every concert's in a different city. So you do the math on that, you're traveling almost every day. And just after a couple months of traveling every day, for me, I was just like, this is not my thing at all. I had thought about being a physician like my dad. My grandfather was a physician. My uncles, my brother, they're all doctors. But long story short, I tried the music thing. And then I guess through touring with Truth, my spiritual journey had been up and down, but I met some really strong Christians who had some good answers. And I decided, because of that experience with Truth, to go into ministry. I didn't know what that would be, but so I moved to Fort Worth to go to Southwestern Baptist Seminary because the leader of that band had been Baptist, and I really didn't know anything else. We grew up in a Methodist church for a while, but then we kind of quit going. At the Baptist church, I enjoyed working in Baptist churches. I enjoyed the studies at Southwestern, but I've struggled, and especially in '95 when they fired the president, Russell Dilday at the time, who I thought he was a pretty decent president, and he was certainly a thinker, as were many of the teachers he had hired. But there was a big shift in policy, and it went from more of an open conversation about things to, this is what you ought to believe, and if you disagree, well, I'll word it nicely. Well, you know.
Let's keep it
right,
family friendly.
Yeah, I don't want to bring any, hellfire and brimstone, but it was a real narrow-minded, judgmental type of perspective, and I wrestle with that. So I wound up, on the advice of some of my professors, going to Germany for a couple months to study, and then going to SMU for a second master's. And I loved the study, and the primary thing, I just very much have enjoyed finding answers to some of the questions, and I've had a lot of the questions. Long story, I wound up coming into the church thinking I'd be a teacher, and I got a job as a pastor in the Methodist church south of Dallas. And here I am, still a pastor 20 years later, even though I never thought I'd be a pastor. And if you knew me in high school or college, you would never think.
You didn't have a moment where you had a situation where you felt the calling. You grew yourself into
Not to the no, not as a pastor. I've been a little bit too. I don't know if crazy is the right word, but I'm certainly not your stereotypical Christian, and never have been. And I've never seen myself that way. But I guess part of that's what makes me unique, I guess.
I think that's what makes you so relatable. Because the first time we came to service here, I just felt like you were talking to me. Everything you were saying was relating to what was going on in my personal life. And I don't know if it was just me or if everyone else was feeling that too. There was a connection. Because I used to go to other churches and I was feeling a disconnect. I didn't feel like the sermons related to my current life. And with your service, it was the total opposite. It was mind-blowing.
Well, and one of the things that we'll get into here in a little bit, and for future conversations or even all the sermons, is I've always, even young, when I was thinking about ministry or music or being a doctor, I've just always been someone to question why. Why am I doing this? What's the point? And I'll never forget, even at Loyola, I was playing literally with some of the best musicians in the world. I mean, it was just a phenomenal group, and they had toured and done all this kind of stuff. And as I'm playing with them, I've literally remember having a moment where I'm thinking, why am I doing this? What's the purpose of playing jazz music? I was a jazz studies major. I didn't say that, and it's not that I'm against people who find their meaning and purpose in providing music and entertainment. But for me, I had to have a deeper answer to that. And one of the reasons I left the jazz music and even the classical music and went into Christian music, which still didn't do it for me, but it was because I just couldn't find answers to my own questions. One of the things that we will probably discuss a little bit later is, how do we find peace and how do we find...
Exactly.
You've got to answer your questions. We've all got questions. A lot of them tend to be the same questions, which we don't realize that other people have the same questions we have. But I know in my own life, I've never been able to have peace or that deeper sense of calm and without being able to say, okay, I can make sense of why I'm here, like on this earth, and what I'm supposed to be doing with my life and where I'm headed. And I could not answer that question in the music world. I could not answer that question in the medical world. But in the religious world, I began to find answers. One reason I want to be a teacher is because obviously there's a lot of exploration in study. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of brings me, that's one reason why I have so many degrees. It's not because I enjoy the plaques on the wall, but it is because through my first master's at Southwestern, my second master's at SMU, and then I got a doctorate also from St. Paul's in Kansas City. Every time that I would take a class or get through another semester or finish another degree, more questions would be answered. And I've just found that every time questions are answered, my life centers just a little bit more. And so my goal with preaching or writing the books or my life, really, matter of fact, I think that's fair to say, my goal at this point in life is just to share some bits and pieces of what I have learned for myself with you, whoever you is, whoever wants to listen to what I say or listen to what I read. And that's one of the things whenever I'm preparing every week is to think, okay, so what? What's the point of this? Why am I wasting your time? I don't want to waste your time. I always say, bring your brain when you come. And the point of that is, if you leave here thinking, that was the dumbest thing I've ever heard, he clearly hasn't thought that through, or, he's been drinking red Kool-Aid, and that I've missed the mark. I have not done what my goal is.
I'm going to tell you, we are here because of that, because you got me thinking, and you got me thinking so much that it was bugging me not sharing it with other people. And I know some people will listen to it and they will not relate. They won't find it interesting. I have friends that don't believe in God and they're probably going to turn it off and never tune it again, and that's okay, you know. This is for those people like you and me who are seeking for answers, who are seeking for meaning in what we do into our everyday lives.
Well, maybe that would be the place to start, the friends who don't believe in God. And you can decide if you want to steer us somewhere else. But to me, that is the first and most important question we all have to answer. And that's the one that I've spent a lot of time. And not to push my books, I don't get any money from them at all. But the first book I wrote, Christian Logic, the whole point of that is to address does believing in God in general make sense to a thinking, analytical, logical person? Because so many people say they don't believe in God, but when you scratch under the surface a little bit, what they actually mean is, I wouldn't mind believing in God, but I've never heard any arguments for believing in God that make any sense or that make more sense than what I've been taught about evolution or about, the way the world works. And I find that if we are just even marginally open to listening to other worldviews or other arguments for why believing in God makes more sense than not believing in God, what I'm finding with most people is, even if you don't take the second step to choose Christianity as your world religion of choice, even with the first step, it is such a liberating, if not enlightening, it frees you to realize there's more in this world, or even beyond this world, than just you're born, you live, you die, you're done. And a lot of people who don't believe in God, they don't like to have those conversations because then it's like death is the end. And then if you try to talk about more than that, well, it's like, well, you're just a weak-minded Christian and, you don't understand the reality of the world or you won't admit it. That's not true at all. I very much see death. I saw it with my dad's profession as an emergency doctor. I've seen it I buried somebody, 2 weeks ago. But if we can logically, analytically make the case, in a sense, for God, as Lee Strobel wrote a book, The Case for Faith, which is a good one also if you're interested in a resource. The Case for Faith by Lee Strobel. Anyway, it really sets the foundation for beginning this journey of what I might call the spiritual life, or a life that it won't answer all the questions, but it certainly gets at the heart of our biggest question, which is this all there is?
Yeah. And I remember once you came to the house and we were having that chat, and I was telling you how, we do all these things, and at the end of the day, there's like a lack of satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
We go to work, we get the kids to school, we walk the dogs, we do the laundry, we clean the house, we do all these things, and then the day's over and we repeat them over and over and over, and then what? And I really was struggling with that. And this is kind of like a simple answer, but it was so hard for me to see it, that doing all these things and producing for my work and my family, and that wasn't really where my happiness was going to come from.
Well, it's simple because it is, even a child can understand it, but it is incredibly complex because the more you understand it, the more you realize how ignorant we are of the depths of the mirage that we buy into. And maybe this is a leadoff. C.S. Lewis, in his book Mere Christianity, he talks about, which is another great resource, by the way, one of the best apologetics, which is kind of making sense of faith in God through Christ, you'll ever read. But he talks about how every civilization that's ever walked the planet, every one, there's no exception to this rule. He says they have all sought happiness, or if you want to call it peace, or whatever word you want to use for whatever it is that we're searching
for. Satisfaction, success.
Success, whatever. All of that in one box. we seek it in every way possible as civilizations except through God. We seek it through power, might, military, armies, conquest, that kind of thing, king of the hill type imagery. We certainly seek it through prosperity, pleasure. There are various ways and values that we have to find happiness or peace or whatever it is that we want to call it is that we're searching for, which, by the way, it's not what we're really searching for, but we think we are, because outside of God, we have to look to the world. I mean, this is what we have. I mean, if you don't look outside of this existence at all, and all you have is, your world, which in our case would be, a spouse, maybe some kids, a house, a job, then you're looking to that immediate environment, your world, to somehow bring to you peace, happiness, joy, something that satisfies. And the problem with that is the world doesn't have the capacity to do that for us. I mean, think about, have you ever owned anything that over time you didn't get tired of it or want a newer, better version, right? I mean, even your husband, right? You want a newer, better version, right? I mean, that's right. We marry, my wife, same way. We marry and then we start looking around and we compare what we have to what other people have. And then we start assuming that we don't. And we start assuming that whatever they have is better than what I have. And this includes spouses. It includes kids. It includes cars and houses and jobs and bank account, everything. And in the beginning, it always feels good. It always satisfies. And that's the case with power or pleasure or money, anything. All the stuff that the world offers, it is a short-lived, hollow promise. But the world screams that this is the way things are.
It does. Every single day, everywhere.
Every day,
From
everywhere.
the TV, the highway, the commercials,
all of
the
it.
magazines, everywhere.
Even your work, unless you're in a very unique work environment, your work is saying, look, you need to be more productive. You need to be, work harder, work longer, work better, work whatever, make more, and this is somehow going to contribute to you having a better life. And I want to ask the question, when? When is that going to, or how about this? As Dr. Phil says, right? How's that working for you? When has that happened? And I've never met anybody that can say, you know what? That happened to me for a 10-year stretch. Now something changed, but for these years of life, everything was great and I was totally satisfied and content and at peace in my heart. Doesn't happen. I mean, I would ask you, can you?
No, I think it gets worse as you advance, in your career, as you have a bigger house, as you have a nicer car, it gets more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
The more we have, to me, I realize, and that's why I'm getting into this journey, because what I'm trying to do, I'm seeking simple, healthier, and happier lifestyles.
Well, let's think about philosophy behind that then. Okay, so you start off and you get the first car, you get the first apartment, or in my case, it just depends on where you start. How about that? And we all start in different places on the journey, but wherever you are on that scale, for a little while it works, but then you realize it's not enough. I need more. And so the goal then is to climb the ladder, the scale, whatever, a little bit more. And so we do. You make a little more money. You get a little nicer car. You have a little nicer house. You're lonely, so it's like, okay, so I do get married. And you do all these things, and supposedly that was going to do it, right?
And then the kids come and you need a bigger house.
But right. But that's what we're just adding more and bigger, but it's not changing anything inside of us. Going back to C.S. Lewis, the piece of it that we miss, which is the downfall of all civilizations. It's going to be true for our country. It's going to be true for the Western civilizations as it is in Asia and everywhere else. You see it with Rome. You see it with China. I mean, all civilizations, there's no exempt one, is that when you're looking to the world to meet that inner craving, right, to satisfy, to bring you peace or joy or long-lasting contentment, it's like his analogy. It's like trying to drive a car without gas. The car is all set up. It looks good. It's all shiny. You get in, but you hit the start button, and it just doesn't work. And the way C.S. Lewis puts it is the engine, you can get it to sputter. You can get it to kind of halfway crank, but it always conks out. And it's because God, if you buy into the God argument, which is why you always have to start with, can we even prove logically that God exists? And I submit to you, yes, certainly we can. But if you go back to God did create us, and we'll assume that for a second, then we'll come back and talk through some of those proofs maybe. But if we assume God created us, then we also have to assume God created us for a reason. It wasn't some arbitrary thing. It was a very intentional. God created you and Eric and, Zara and Zach and Scott and, and then you have to say, oh, well, that means God created all people. Well, why would God do that?
I'm going to have to tell you, I didn't know.
Right.
Up until recently when you touched on that, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I have been wondering for many years, what is my purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And like I said earlier with the other answer, when you said it, it sounded like a simple answer, but I had not seen it for many years.
Well, and that goes back. It is simple unless you don't know it.
Exactly.
And a lot of these things, and that's how God works, in my opinion, is that when you hear truth from God, you're like, well, of course it would be that way. It's logical. It's almost common sense. But if you've never heard it,
it's almost common sense. Yeah, that's how I felt. This is common sense. How can I not see it?
Well, the thing is, if you've never heard it, how would you? It's not rocket science, and yet the flip side is many of these things are not common sense. Many of these things actually it takes study and education, and you have to apply yourself. And part of the problem I think so many of us have is that we go through life and we just assume that by living my life, I'm going to find the answers to life's deep questions. Well, where has that ever happened for us? By spending money, you're going to learn how to be a good money manager?
That sounds like the opposite.
Yeah. It is right. Or by being married, you're going to automatically have a better marriage as time progresses because you're married? Or is it the opposite? Matter of fact, there's a concept in science called the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. It's the idea that all living organisms over time, they degrade, they fall apart, they decay, and all living things are headed towards a state of rest. And without intentional injection of energy into the system, in this case, our intelligence, not only are you going to not learn anything, what you did know is going to be forgotten as well. That kind of makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Totally.
So where our knowledge of God is concerned, a lot of people say stuff which, not to judge them, it's just such an empty, hollow statement. They say, well, I'm a spiritual person, but I don't go to church, I don't read the Bible, I don't read any books, I don't study theology, I don't study God, but I'm a really spiritual person. And I want to say, okay, what you're saying is you believe that God exists, but you have no idea what that God is like that you're saying you believe in. Well, how can you have a relationship with somebody that you have no idea who or what they're about?
And I wonder, too, do we really believe in him, or do we just say so because we were taught to?
Well, that's another question entirely. That's right. Yeah.
And let me go back because I feel like we left people hanging.
Sure.
You said, do we know why God created us? And I jumped in and interrupted you because you recently talked about that. But for those that were not here, go into that.
Yeah. So I like to use, I think God reveals the deepest truths through everyday life. It has to be something that when you hear it, so for those listeners who are like, I wonder if I'm going to agree with this, right? Like I say, bring your brain with you when you come to church. Bring your brain, use your brain. And if you're listening to this, just think, does this feel right? Why in the world would any of us ever have children? Zara, Scott, they can be a royal pain in the you-know-what, right?
Yes.
I don't know what I'm allowed to say on this.
In the you-know-what.
In the you-know-what. Knowing that, why would anybody have kids? You tell me.
They wouldn't.
Yes, you would.
Knowing my kids, they wouldn't.
Why would you have your kids? If you could do it all over again, would you still have them? And you can't
I
answer
would have
no.
more.
Okay.
If I could do it all over again, I would have more.
Why?
Because...
They're a pain. They're expensive.
But you forget about that because you get more joy out of the relationship, the little giggles.
Let me back up even.
Smiles.
Why did you have them in the first place? Let's assume it wasn't an accident, right? Let's say you wanted them. You're like, I want children. Why would anybody want children?
It wasn't planned, but honestly, and this, I don't know, I'm going to be judged, but this is what you do. You get married, you have kids, you have your own family.
So that's a fair answer.
I don't know.
It was just cultural expectation.
Exactly.
So let's back behind that a little bit.
But I did want kids.
Okay. Why?
I don't know.
Outside of cultural expectation.
Because that was the next step that I felt was in my life. You know, you get married.
Okay, so I'm going to give you my answer to what I think was really going on, which is going to basically say you're wrong if your own answer that you just told me, right? So, but you can see if I'm right or wrong on this. But tell me you can relate to my story. So Gladys and I, we tried to have kids for a couple of years and couldn't. And then, matter of fact, of all places, we went down to Cuernavaca and Tosco and Puebla, and Gladys was doing a Spanish immersion down there, and we talked about if we didn't conceive soon, that we would see a fertility doctor one time, then we wouldn't have kids. I am 45, so that would have been 8 years ago, 9 years ago, I guess. So we were pretty far along in terms of that. But we talked a lot about why would we want kids. Let me back up one more. At some point in your life, you were not married.
Mm-hmm. I didn't want kids.
Did you want to get married?
Yeah,
Why?
I did. Because that's what everyone else did. Because I felt like an outsider.
Wait. So if I brought Eric in here and I said, do you know the only reason she wanted to marry you is
because that was what was next. You know, you go to college and then you get married and have a family and...
So if all that's blown away and I said to you, you know what, you can do whatever you want, would you want to stay married?
Yes.
Why?
Because I like it.
Why?
Because I like to have a companion. Because
now you're getting somewhere. Remember my big question? Why? You're gonna hear that a lot. What's the negative word for not having a companion?
Loneliness.
Yes.
I don't like to be lonely. I don't think anyone likes to be lonely.
Do you know why?
Because you die.
You don't die if you're lonely.
Well, you don't get any stimuli. You don't get... Well, I mean, you don't physically die, but inside, you're keeping up to yourself.
There's an emptiness.
Emptiness, that's the word.
There is. So now we're getting back to, you had asked, how do we find peace and contentment and fullness? The Jewish word shalom, which is like a really big... Well, you got to trace you can't solve a problem unless you know what the problem is, right? I mean, I had migraines for years. They always started in my stomach. And so they put me on, I had upper GIs and Prilosec, prescription drugs, all this stuff to keep my stomach from getting nauseated. 10 years down the road, I went into the doctor that nauseated. I used to go to the emergency room all the time for Phenergan shots, all kinds of stuff. Wow. Go into the emergency room over and over again. And finally, this last time, Gladys says, let's not go to the emergency room. Let's go to your primary care doctor. And I was like, okay. And I'd been sick for 2 days. And I won't describe all that to you.
Please,
I'm sure you can figure all that out, right? So we go in, and he's like, okay, I see you're very nauseated, have been for 2 days. It was violent. And he goes, does your head hurt? I said, oh, it's killing me. And then he asked a few more questions. He goes, I think you have migraines, and I think you have a unique type of migraine that starts in your stomach. And he said, next time this I went ahead and got the shots again. He says, next time this starts happening, and he gave me some Imitrex, which is a migraine thing. As soon as it starts, take one of these. Tell me what happens. A couple weeks later, started getting nauseated again. My head started to hurt after the nausea. Took the pill. I was fine. Why do I tell that story? If you can't figure out what your problem is, you certainly can't solve it. That makes sense?
Yeah.
You'll run around with migraines, but you'll be taking Prilosec.
ER visits.
Prilosec doesn't help a migraine. It just doesn't. It does a really good thing.
He gave you the right medicine.
Yeah, eventually. So, back to my why question and loneliness. Back to my why question and emptiness. Mm-hmm. We all have emptiness inside. We all have a part of us. Now, this goes back to the God thing.
Back to the why we were created.
That I believe goes back to family or not, getting married or not, having friends or children or not, what it is about Thanksgiving or Christmas that seems awfully wrong if you're by yourself for the whole season, and why it feels so right when we are surrounded by loved ones and having a nice meal and smiling and hugging and not fighting, right? When we're having that. Well, here it is. I believe that God created us, and the scriptures are very clear about this. God created us for family. God wanted children too. And you ask yourself, well, that seems kind of simple, right? Well, who do you think gave us the concept of family to begin with? Who do you think gave us, who created within us the idea of love and the need for each other? Who do you think gave us this? It's just an inherent part of being human unless you've become inhuman by choices and all that. That's a whole nother conversation. But we all know when you're surrounded by family and everybody's loving on each other and being nice to each other, you don't have the abusive person in the midst. But we all know that there's something incredibly intimate and right and warmth. There's a joy there. There's something, you could have $1 million in the bank, 10 million, 100 million. Look at all these stars who are, what's the latest one? Brad and Jolie, Brad and Angela, who are getting the divorce, and they're having custody battles and all. You can have all the money in the world, but I guarantee you, if we sat down with Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie right now, they would be so unhappy. And the obvious reason is because you cannot be happy. And this is another thing. Use your brain. Maybe I'm wrong, right? You cannot be happy. None of us can. We can't have joy. We can't have peace. We can't have that inner contentment we're talking about if you don't have healthy, loving, supportive, gracious relationships, meaningful relationships with other people. And the flip side is true. The closer you are with other people, regardless of how much money you have, the more peace and joy and contentment and warm fuzzies in your heart you're going to have, no matter how little or how much money you have. One of the things that when we're down in Mexico City, you've seen this, third world in a lot of places.
Third world. the entire country.
So little. So does that automatically mean they all have to be miserable because they don't have as much money? We happen to meet a whole lot of people down there that were super happy. You know, the old...
Because the less they had, the less complicated their lives are too.
I think that's part of it, but I think if you have less material things, the more intentional you have to be about family and friends. And, of course, I'm going to keep bringing the God conversation in. It is less complicated because you do have less to distract you from the main thing. It's like the old story of the fisherman down in Mexico, and he's
I love this one. You told it to me, and I was just like, exactly what I was.
Right. So he's
But go ahead and tell it.
He doesn't have any money, but he lives on the beach, and he has a boat, and he goes out every day and fishes. He's been doing this for 60 years or 50 years, whatever. And at some point, this New York stock guy, you know, big money bags, comes down and he hires this fisherman to take him out and fish. And so they go out and they just catch hundreds of fish. And the guy's just amazed. The stockbroker's amazed. And he's like, this is amazing. How often does this happen? And the old fisherman says, oh, every day. He's like, you catch this much fish every day? And the guy's like, yeah. He's like, well, do you realize... I mean, if you really do catch this every day, what if we hired, you know, 2 or 3 other boats to come up alongside and we caught more fish? And the old fisherman's like, okay, then what? He goes, well, you know, we can sell the fish and hire some more boats, and we can have a fleet of boats, and we can make a lot of money. And the old guy says, well, then what? And the stockbroker says, well, I mean, if it goes well, and we have a fleet of boats, and they're catching this many fish with all these boats every day, we're making millions of dollars, well, then, you know, we can buy a house on the beach and retire. And the old guy looks back, and he's got his house on the beach, and he's like, I already got all that. And, of course, the stockbroker walks away confused. Doesn't
Which
get
is
it at all.
how I was when you told the story. I was like, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. So then that gets us back to the initial, you know, why are we here and what's the point? And the first thing is to fish, in a sense. You know, to be able to do things that actually bring meaning and peace and joy and pleasure and, you know, within healthy limits. But underneath that, it's also to share those moments with other people that hopefully we can love and they will love us in return. Because it's in sharing life that meaning in life is found, and not just with each other, but also with God. And I'll, you know, bet the farm, hang my hat, whatever on this statement. One of the problems, and C.S. Lewis also addresses this in the Mere Christianity book. He's got a chapter in there on Christian marriage, and he talks about that so many people, when we get married, when you first meet, you know, it's all about the sweaty palms and the rapid, you know, heart palpitations, and it's all about how you make me feel, and let's go to a movie, and I have so much fun with you, and blah, 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 you know, yeah, yay, and then they get married, and then it's who's taking out the trash, who's going to vacuum, then you have kids, and who's going to change the, you know, so it goes from, when I met you, you made me so happy, and we had so much fun together, and it was a pleasure. It's not sharing life. It's you did something and acted in ways that brought me pleasure. We get married and live together for a while, and now all of the obligations of life come crashing in, and now it's not as fun to be around you anymore because we're not only going to movies and holding hands and walking the beach. Now, you know, we're cleaning up the poop from the dog that gifts under the piano in the living room, and the kids' diapers this, and we wind up, you're not making my life fun anymore, so let's just get divorced. And what C.S. Lewis says is you will never discover what true, meaningful, deep, lifelong love is about until you get over this idea that your spouse is a commodity. By commodity, I mean something to be bought and sold, something that it's to be used as long as it brings value to your life, but after that, throw it away and get another one. Life is about sharing. Love is about sharing life. It's about going through the nasty times together. It's about going through the fun times together. It's about sharing life when you're sick. It's about sharing life when you're well. It's about having a glass of wine together or watching a TV show together. It's about doing everything together, sharing life. And once we realize that it's not about you making me happy, but it's about never being, here we go, alone, then all of a sudden, it kind of takes the sting out of, well, my wife doesn't make me happy like she did when we first got married. However, and then you get to the marriage vows. However, she's always here when I'm sick. She's always here when I've had a bad day at work. She's always here when somebody's been mean to me, treated me horribly. She's still here when I've treated her horribly. And I'm still here for her. And oh yeah, and we went to Disney World together, and we went to the mountains outside of Portland together, and we went to Australia together. And when I talk about those things with her, it literally creates meaning that is so different. I'll never forget when I toured with Truth back when I was, I must have been 20 or 21. It's been so long.
It's a long time.
Yeah. But they were real popular. They had #1 Christian hits on the Christian radio at the time. And so they had, there was a Truth cruise where the whole cruise ship had been bought out for them to spend time with Truth. And so we would play concerts and stuff. And on this cruise ship, we went down to the Bahamas and several other places. And at the time, I was not dating anybody. Matter of fact, the girl that I thought that I was going to marry at the time, we had just broken up, and I was really lonely. And at the same time, I had left the fraternity because they were doing all types of things that I just didn't believe in anymore. And it was a really lonely time of life for me. And I remember being on that cruise and going outside one morning and watching the sunrise. And I remember thinking, literally, I still have the picture actually in my office. I took a picture of it. I was thinking, this is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. And I'll never forget thinking, and it is so empty having no one to share this with. And I go back to, why do we feel that way? Mm-hmm. Well, I do believe in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and everything in it and around it, on it. And then God created us. God is, and always will be. At the heart of God is love, grace, we call it. And loving, gracious people or beings, or God in this case, there's a need to share life. Now, we believe in the Christian church that God was 3 in 1, so God is interrelational between God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But so it's not that God needed human beings to have, a better existence in a sense. But just like us, me and Gladys didn't need Scott to have a better family. I don't know if that's the right word. But when we had Scott, our family automatically becomes more complete. So it's not like we have one child. It wouldn't be like we're less complete of a family because we only have one. But if we had 14, then obviously it would bring in a different dynamic of completeness than having one. And so being a relational God, within God's own loving self, God said, I want family. From the dust he creates Adam and Eve. And ultimately, not getting into all of the other intricacies of what happened and free will and, some of the anger people have at God or why they say they don't believe in God almost always goes back to disappointment or disillusionment. Something bad happened young or whatever. Why? And almost always in those cases, not always, but almost always, somebody along the way has done something mean or said something mean or even, abusive or worse. And they ask, well, God, why would you allow this to happen? Well, here's the thing. God didn't create robots. It's like when we bought my son, he wanted a dog, and 2 years ago, we spent like $300 on this electric dog for Christmas. He played with that thing for maybe 5 seconds. And he's never touched it again. Well, 18 months ago, we got a real poodle. And that's the favorite thing in my son's life.
Because he can have a relationship with him.
That's right. What's the difference between, and in a sense, that was a good electronic dog. I mean, it would bark and it would roll over and it would fetch. I mean, it was like the best of the best electronic dogs. And my son could care less. What's the difference? The difference is our poodle, there's a warmth there and there's a choice there. It's not on the same level of a human being. But at first, the poodle was kind of skittish of Scott, and they've developed a relationship. They weren't close the poodle didn't love Scott right away. Now, some other dogs, like labs, are a little more clingy right away. This dog was not.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But the longer they've been together, the more that relationship has flourished. And anyway, living things have choices. Human beings have big choices. You can hate or you can love. And the thing that makes love so great, I know that Gladys, my wife, could choose to hate me. I know she could choose another man. I know she could choose to cheat on me. I know she could choose all these other options of betrayal and of doing all types of things that would it would hurt horribly. But because she chooses not to do those things, I also know that she loves me. And so God had to create with us, within every human being, real free will to be able to say, Lord, I love you or I don't. Because if he were to have pre-programmed us with that hardwired software that said, you don't have a choice, you're going to love it, then it would have been robots or moral puppets, or however you want to define that, computers, programs. And there is no computer program ever that will ever be able, or robot or whatever, that will ever be able to love, because you can't without the choice to hate. So ultimately, where I'm going with all of that is, why were we created? Just look to your own longings for relationships. Think carefully about, why would anybody get married? Why would anybody have children other than, the cultural answer, or it was an accident, or I have no idea, I got drunk, right? Underneath that, the answer is, and this is what the scriptures say in Genesis. God looked at Adam. God looked at everything that God had made. Genesis 1-3 kind of tells a story. And it was really good. Really good. And you look at the world today, and if it wasn't all messed up by us human beings, it is really good. It's beautiful.
It is.
It'll kill you, but it's still beautiful. But God looked at all that, but something was wrong. Because God looked at the man and he was alone. And the only thing that was wrong in that whole situation, God said, it is not good for man to be alone. That's deep stuff.
It is.
Which goes back to who created the human being that way. God did. Why? Because we're made in God's image, which is also what Genesis 1-3 tells us. And so if it wasn't good for the man to be alone, then God's basically saying it's not good for God to be alone. Just like it's not good for you to be alone, or me to be alone, or whoever the listeners are. We all know this. We don't want to be alone. And when we are truly, it's one thing, I'm sick of you, I'm going to have my coffee. Please don't talk to me for a week, right? 2 weeks. But look, after an amount of time where you're forcibly separated, loneliness is an emptiness that is horribly dark. It is painfully dark. And the reason is because we're not meant to be alone. And there's only one way to fill that piece of emptiness. And I would say there are two pieces, and this kind of gets us to the first piece, and maybe this is where, I don't know how long
this
you want
is
to go.
where we probably
Need
leave
to
it,
stop,
and then
right.
we'll pick it up some other time.
In every human heart, there are two holes. Right? One, only sharing life with God can fill, and one, only other people can fill. I might even say there are three holes. Let me back up. One, a healthy relationship with God can fill. God defines this in terms of living water, bread of life, light of the world. But it's some vine branches. It's the idea that there's an emptiness in all of us that only God can fill. There's another one that relationships with other people can only fill. Yes, we can walk closely with God, but the truth is we need friends, and we need family, and we need a church community. We need some other ways to connect and share life with other people. We have to have that. And the third piece that I'm going to throw in that's a little bit more ambiguous, a little bit more difficult to understand, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. We need a healthy relationship with ourselves.
Oh, that's crucial.
Yeah. And
I'm glad you added it there.
Yeah. Well, Jesus kind of put it this way. The great commandment is love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love other people as you love yourself. And understanding how to love yourself and what that looks like without being selfish and prideful, but to, in a healthy way, to literally be able to look in the mirror and love in a healthy way what you see. That's also, if you can't do that, you will forever have an emptiness in your heart as well. Now, the good news is God gives us help and hope and instruction on how to love both God and yourself and other people. And Jesus basically says, if you've never read the Bible, if you've never studied God, if you've never put any of these pieces together, a summary of all of it is this. Here's all you need to know. Love God with all you are. Love other people as you love yourself. And he's like, you're on the right track for finding what you're looking for, which often we can't define it. We use words like peace and love and joy and contentment and whatever, but he talks about it in terms of by filling that thirst, that deep hunger that all of us, every human being has it. We're all hungry. We're all thirsty. And the world's bread, you eat it, tomorrow you're hungry again. The world's water, you drink it, tomorrow you're thirsty again. But when you dive into this well, this living well of water that God's offering, which is not just God, it's all, right? It's loving God, other people, and yourself. When you dive into that worldview or philosophy on life, quite literally, it changes everything.
Well, Pastor Thomas, we are running out of time, but we are going to pick it up from there next time. Thank you so much for sharing, for your time, and hopefully our listeners are going to enjoy it, are going to find comfort in this podcast. And You promise we'll do this again?
Yeah,
And,
sure.
I came here with a huge list of questions, and I think we didn't even get to the first one.
We didn't even get to the first one.
All of this was probably not even on the list.
Yeah.
But this is great. And
Good.
we'll keep coming back as your time allows and our crazy schedules. Because what you have to say, I find it really comforting and really eye-opening. And I'd like to share it with more people that may be seeking this.
Good. And whoever's listening to this too, I would just say to them, be encouraged. There is always hope. There's always a better way. There are answers. It may take a little longer to find them than you think, but patience and diligence and a little study, and we really can make progress.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
What do you think, guys? Quite different than the other subjects that I've been touching on. And, like we mentioned on the podcast, I had a list of 10 questions that I wanted to ask Pastor Thomas. And we didn't even get to the first one. We got stuck talking, and that's fine. He's willing to come back. We're going to do this a couple times throughout the year. And I invite you, if you want to know more about him or listen to his sermons, you can find them online. It's a free download. You can just play them on the computer. It's free. All right, guys, that's it for today. Don't forget to connect with me. Give me your feedback. What do you think about this episode? What do you believe in? Is this being helpful to you? I want to touch on topics that you will find useful. So please go on Facebook. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and give me your feedback. Tell me what are some of the topics that you will like me to talk about, that you would like me to interview people about, okay? Remember, this is all about sharing content that's going to improve your life, that's going to bring some meaning, and that's going to serve a purpose in your life, okay? So let me know. I'm on social media, Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. So send me an email. Go on the website, www.yezminthomas.com. You'll find all the information there. Let me know what you want to hear about, and I will do the homework, and I will bring you those answers. All right, guys, I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. It's quite of a little longer podcast, but I appreciate you very, very much, and I appreciate your time, and I sure hope you found this podcast useful. Till the next one, keep it simple. I'll talk to you on the next take.